It was the North Atlantic in the dead of winter around the year 1000. Out there, the ocean wasn't just rough, it was alive and furious. Waves as tall as houses slammed against the sides of a creaking wooden longship, while the bitter wind drove the temperature well below freezing. Ice clung to the rigging, men's beards turned to brittle frost, and every breath hung in the air like shattered glass. For weeks on end, those Viking crews endured conditions that would finish off a modern person in a matter of hours. There were no cabins to crawl into, no warm bunks, not even a wall between them and that killing cold. And the most astonishing part of all? They sailed without fire. Not a single flame aboard. Now, you might ask, how in the world did they survive those journeys across some of the most dangerous waters on Earth, with no heat to keep them alive? The answer, my friend, changes everything we thought we knew about Viking seamanship. Excavations at 8 major ship sites have revealed something that left historians stunned. Vikings didn't heat their ships. No braziers, no hearths, no fire of any kind. And this wasn't out of ignorance or lack of skill. No, it was deliberate, a piece of brilliant engineering that valued safety far above comfort. The techniques they used were so effective that they helped make possible the conquest of kingdoms and even the discovery of new continents. But to understand it, we need to start with a simple truth that Hollywood always gets wrong. Fire and wooden ships do not mix. When you're sailing in a vessel made entirely of pine, oak, and tarred rope, a single stray spark doesn't just threaten warmth. It threatens your life and your entire crew. So how do we actually know that Vikings sailed without fire? The proof comes from the ships themselves, preserved in the mud and cold for 1,000 years, quietly holding on to their story. The clearest evidence comes from Roskilde Fjord, where the famous Skaldalef ships rested undisturbed for nearly a millennium. These 5 vessels, warships, cargo carriers, and fishing boats dating from roughly 1000 to 1070 CE, were painstakingly excavated by teams at the Viking Ship Museum. They found everything from water barrels and tool chests to ballast stones and even remnants of food. But one discovery, or rather one absence, made them look twice. Across all 5 ships, no matter the type or purpose, there wasn't a single trace of any heating device. No brazier, no hearth, nothing. And this pattern holds true across every major Viking ship discovery ever made. The magnificent Oseberg ship, built around 834 CE, contained all sorts of fine cooking vessels, but they were ceremonial, meant for the afterlife, not for the open sea. The Gokstad ship from about 890 CE carried massive water containers, yet no sign of a fire pit or stove. Even the recent Gellerstad excavation of 2020 and 2021, conducted with ground-penetrating radar and modern scanning technology, turned up no evidence of any cooking or heating equipment. The Old Norse sagas and law codes back up these findings. Norwegian legal texts known as the Gragas law codes required ships to make 3 trips ashore each day, 1 for collecting fresh water and 2 for preparing meals. In the Erbygja saga, there's even mention of drawing lots to see who would cook the food, but the cooking itself happened on land, not aboard the ship. So yes, there's no question the Vikings didn't use fire at sea. But that leads to the next big question. Why would they choose to face such bone-cracking cold rather than risk a small, controlled flame? The answer lies in a terrifying truth every sailor of that age understood. Once fire touched a wooden ship, there was no saving it. Now, to understand just how deadly fire was aboard a Viking ship, you've got to picture how those vessels were built. They used what's called clinker-built construction, long, overlapping planks of oak fastened together and sealed with tar. Any gaps between the boards were stuffed tight with animal hair or wool, and the rigging was waterproofed using sticky pine pitch. Even the sail itself, a great sheet of tightly woven wool coated with animal fat to shed water, was, in truth, little more than a giant torch waiting to go up in flames. But what really made these ships vulnerable was their open design. Unlike the later sailing vessels with decks, cabins, and bulkheads, Viking ships were basically enormous open boats. No partitions, no fire breaks, and absolutely no way to contain a blaze once it started. Archaeologists studying maritime disasters have found that in such a setup, a fire could devour an entire ship in less than 4 minutes. So if they couldn't risk fire, trapped for weeks on frozen seas with nothing but the icy wind, how in the world did they stay alive? The answer lay not in burning fuel, but in redefining the very idea of warmth itself. Textile remains from archaeological sites like Herjolfsens in Greenland tell a remarkable story. The Vikings mastered the art of layered clothing centuries before modern science caught up. They wove and tailored garments that could hold warmth even when soaked through, something that puts many modern materials to shame. Different grades of wool served different purposes. Coarse outer layers broke the wind, softer inner ones trapped heat, and others wicked away moisture. One of the most surprising discoveries comes from both the sagas and preserved garments themselves. The Vikings had a daily ritual for keeping warm that was nothing short of ingenious. According to the Laxdæla saga, women who crewed alongside the men would take bone needles and wax thread each morning, and sew the men's sleeves tightly shut at the wrists. Not tied, not buttons sewn. This created a perfect seal that kept body heat from escaping. When it came time for battle or landfall, the warriors would simply slice themselves free with their socks knives. It was a small act, but part of a broader system of textile technology that was far ahead of its time. Archaeologists working in Greenland have uncovered burial garments showing exactly this kind of modification. Sleeves stitched closed, outer layers made of sealskin for sailors, and fur linings from wolves and bears for insulation. Their clothing worked as a complete system, what modern researchers call a portable microclimate. Layer upon layer, trapping warmth, blocking wind, and managing moisture. It was brilliant, but even that couldn't keep a man warm through the endless dark hours of northern nights. And that's when the Vikings turned to perhaps their cleverest invention of all. Forget the movie image of Vikings sleeping separately, wrapped in furs like wild beasts. The truth was far more practical and far more human. They slept together in communal sleeping systems described in several sagas. In Egil's saga, there's mention of shared sleeping arrangements using what were called waterproof skin bags, most likely the hudfat referred to in the Prose Edda. These were two-person sleeping bags, made from sheepskin with the wool turned inward. They weren't designed for privacy or comfort, they were designed for survival. Body heat was shared, conserved, and recycled. And in that way, night after freezing night, the Vikings endured the cold that would have claimed anyone else. I'll tell you something most folks don't realize about life on those old Viking ships. When you've got two bodies tucked into an insulated space, you're not just sharing quarters, you're making your own kind of furnace. Those heavy bags they used weren't just bedding. They could hold the inside air a good 15 or 20 degrees warmer than whatever the North Sea was throwing at them. And that wasn't a fancy luxury either. Winter camps and old maritime records make it clear this was standard equipment, the kind every crew counted on. The men didn't pick their sleeping partners out of friendship. No, that was all worked out by the watch schedules, same way it's laid out in the old Landnamabok. When one fellow climbed out to stand his watch, his body had already warmed up the shared space. The next man would slide into that same pocket of warmth, and the sleeping area never truly went cold. You've got to admire the brains behind that. It was thermal genius before anyone knew the term. Ship reconstructions today give us a clear picture of where they slept. The crew bedded down between the rowing benches, perched on platforms made from the very oars they'd been pulling, keeping themselves above the damp, freezing bilge air. And when the sail came down for the night, it wasn't just stored away. It became a canvas tent draped over the whole vessel, trapping the warmth of dozens of bodies like a great communal blanket. Even the richest Vikings didn't get special treatment here. No private hearths for the ship's leaders. Out there on the water, survival mattered more than rank. But keeping your body warm like that took fuel, calories, and a lot of them. Cooking on a ship wasn't really an option, so they packed food that could be eaten cold but still pack a punch. Archaeologists have found proof of it from Hedeby to York. Dried fish tough enough to last for months, hard ship's biscuits, dense nut breads that shrugged off salt spray, and a kind of cold porridge system all ready before departure. The Icelandinga saga even talks about that porridge. They'd make it in huge batches, working butter and salt into it until it's set up into a dense paste. The men could eat it straight from the sack or mix it with a little cold water, getting 2,000 or 3,000 calories a day, just enough to keep their bodies from giving out in the cold. York site digs show just how large these stores were. Mountains of dried fish, hardtack, and even fermented dairy meant to last the whole voyage. But that raises the question, how did the Vikings get so smart about food and warmth? The answer isn't out at sea at all. It's back on land. The Vikings weren't constantly drifting between icebergs like some folks imagine. They had a whole network of harbors, staging areas, and winter camps. Archaeologists have uncovered over 200 such sites stretching from Norway clear across to Newfoundland, mapped out by the Viking Ship Museum's Coastal Archaeology Project. We didn't realize how big the operation really was until modern digs made it obvious. Take Torksey in England. Between 2009 and 2017, the universities of Sheffield and York revealed the remains of a winter camp covering more than 55 hectares. This wasn't just a rough campfire spot either. It had hearth systems, workshops, and even family accommodations. These land-based hubs were where Vikings warmed up, repaired gear, and cooked the kind of meals you simply couldn't make on a tossing ship. On land, they showed off cooking technology we almost never find on their ships: riveted iron pots hanging from tripod stands, long suspension chains for precise hearth cooking, and soapstone vessels with remarkable heat retention. Every bit of it designed for the shore, not the sea. Now, if you look at the old Viking longhouses, take the one up in Borg on the Lofoten Islands, for instance, you'll see just how smart those people were when it came to building for the cold. The designs show a downright scientific understanding of airflow, smoke control, and the placement of a central hearth that could heat the whole hall without choking everyone in smoke. It's impressive stuff. But strangely enough, those same ideas never made it out to sea. And it wasn't because they couldn't do it. No, the Vikings had the know-how for shipboard heating. They just flat out chose not to use it. That's the curious part. They knew how to build a fire safely, but on their ships they refused to. You might ask yourself, why would anyone choose discomfort on purpose, especially when other cultures had already figured out how to keep warm afloat? By the time the Vikings were roaming the northern seas, the folks down in the Mediterranean had been cooking right on their ships for centuries. Roman naval digs have turned up bronze braziers and specialized charcoal stoves, little portable kitchens built for the deck. The Byzantines went even further, fitting entire galley sections into their vessels, with chimneys and proper ventilation systems. Underwater excavations in the Mediterranean have uncovered clear evidence of all this. But up north, nothing of the sort. The Vikings weren't the only ones steering clear of fire at sea. Anglo-Saxon and Mauritanian ships show the exact same pattern, according to research out of Cambridge and Groningen. No braziers, no galleys, just cold provisions and shore-based cooking whenever possible. And there's a reason that southern ingenuity never made its way north. The shipbuilding priorities were different. The Vikings built for speed, for endurance, and for raiding in the kind of weather that would send most men running for a tavern. They made a deliberate trade-off. No heating systems meant lighter ships, more room for supplies, and faster escapes when things went bad. It was all about survival and strategy, not comfort. Now, people often wonder if modern sailors could handle those same brutal conditions using nothing but Viking methods. Turns out they can, and they did. In 2007, the Sea Stallion expedition sailed from Roskilde to Dublin using a full-scale, historically accurate reconstruction of a Viking longship. That voyage, carefully documented by the Viking Ship Museum, proved beyond doubt that the old methods worked. The crew survived weeks on cold water without a single fire. They stayed alive by doing exactly what the Vikings did: sleeping close, sharing warmth, maintaining their wool clothing, and rotating their watch duties in perfect coordination. It wasn't just about endurance, it was about teamwork. Those simple, well-organized habits kept everyone's core body temperature in the safe zone, even when icy winds rolled across the North Sea. But there was another piece to the puzzle, something the archaeologists like to call the psychological systems of survival. You can keep your body warm, sure, but keeping your mind steady through weeks of cold, sleepless nights? That's another battle entirely. Excavations from over 50 Viking camps have turned up more than 300 gaming pieces, dice, carved boards, and all sorts of little entertainment trinkets. The Museum of Cultural History in Oslo points out that these weren't just toys to pass the time. They were tools for morale, a way to keep spirits high and minds sharp when the weather closed in. It seems the Vikings understood something modern science only caught up with recently. Staying alive in the cold isn't just about heat. It's about hope, laughter, and the small rituals that keep men human when the world outside turns to ice. You know, it wasn't just their toughness that got those Viking crews through the cold. It was their spirit. The gaming, the storytelling, the little contests of strength or wit they held on deck. All that wasn't just for fun. Those things kept morale alive when the wind bit through their cloaks and the sea spray froze in their beards. The Vikings might not have had our modern words for it, but they understood deep down that your state of mind could change what your body could handle. Today, we'd call that psychological thermogenesis, the power of the mind to push the body through hardship. And they were smart about more than just morale. Their whole approach to sailing was strategic. Contrary to what some folks imagine, they didn't go out chasing storms in the dead of winter just to prove how tough they were. No, they planned around the weather, working within narrow seasonal windows that made survival possible, practical rather than heroic. They timed their voyages so they could make regular landfall, keeping contact with the shore instead of facing endless, freezing nights at sea. That kind of wisdom, knowing when not to sail, is what really conquered the North Atlantic. Their success came from a whole system of intelligent choices, not brute strength. They wore advanced wool garments that stayed warm even when soaked through. They created shared sleeping systems that recycled body heat. They mapped out their voyages with incredible precision, supported by a chain of coastal bases where food and repairs could be managed on land. Every step was deliberate. These weren't just rugged warriors toughing it out in miserable conditions. They were maritime engineers, planners, and problem solvers. They built a sustainable way to live and travel through some of the harshest environments on Earth. When you think about it, these folks reached North America a full 5 centuries before Columbus ever dreamed of setting sail. They traded as far as Greenland, down to Constantinople, and reshaped the whole medieval world through the sea lanes they controlled. And they did all that, every voyage, every conquest, every trade, in open boats, without a single onboard fire to warm them. So next time that winter wind cuts through your modern jacket and you reach for your car's heater, take a moment to think about that. Those Viking sailors made a conscious decision to live without such comforts. They chose speed over warmth, safety over softness, and community over individual ease. Their survival wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about mastering it, bending it to their will through cooperation and planning. They didn't simply live in spite of the cold. They built their world around it. They reorganized their society, their habits, even their psychology to make cold not an enemy, but a partner in their way of life. And in doing that, in transforming themselves from comfort-bound farmers into cold-forged seafarers, they became something the world had never seen before. They became unstoppable.